Imagine this, you wake up on a sunny Sunday morning, no plans except for meeting up with a couple of friends for some coffee. However, between you and the cafe is one of the most amazing mountain roads with curves, straights, and elevation changes that would put some of the greatest racetracks in the world to shame. Now, you're faced with a dilemma because you've been blessed with the choice of two cars to take you there. One is the brand new 2024 Mercedes AMG GT Coupe, a 585 horsepower beast wrapped in one of the most beautiful coupe suits of all time, or you can grab the keys for the track-focused but still pretty civilized and stunning 2022 Porsche 911 GT3. Which one do you take? In this video, I'll let you know which one I'd take and why by comparing the spec and tech, but more importantly, the design. This is going to be a pretty difficult choice. So we have the brand new 2024 Mercedes AMG GT Coupe, which I think is one of the best looking cars for the 2024 model year, compared to the Porsche 911 GT3. Not the RS, we're just going to do the GT3 here because I think the pricing is a little too steep, the differences in the price between the RS and the AMG GT. Before we jump into Photoshop and have a look at the design from front, side, and rear, and also the interior, which by the way is a huge deal for me in this specific case, let's have a look at some of the spec and tech here. So here you can see the basic spec and tech of these two cars. V8 for the Mercedes, flat 6 for the 911, 518 horsepower in the GT3, 585 in the Mercedes, but it weighs a lot more than the Porsche. 0 to 60, 3.2 seconds on the Mercedes, 2.7 for the Porsche 911. Just insane, and have a look at just how beautiful this is. We have the GT53 and GT63, both with a 4-liter twin-turbo V8 and 9-speed automatic transmission. So the 53 generates 469 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque, which sounds like, you know, totally enough for a package like this. But then you have the GT63 with 577 horsepower and 590 pound-feet of torque. And the 63 cost about $40,000 more than the GT53, and the starting price for the GT Coupe is projected to be around $150,000. And as we mentioned earlier, 0 to 60 is about 3.2 seconds for the Mercedes. Inside, the infotainment screen is 11.9 inches, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto comes standard in the Mercedes. So looking at the Porsche 911 GT3, in this case for the GT3 RS you have 518 horsepower from a 4-liter flat 6, and the GT3, not the RS, has a starting price of $171,000 for the GT3, and then you have $225,000 for the GT3 RS. I would definitely be totally fine with the GT3 with a manual transmission, and that is also a big deal. You don't get a manual in the Mercedes. The automatic transmission achieved an impressive 2.7 seconds 0 to 60 time for the Porsche GT3, which is just mind-blowing to me. 6-speed manual is a little bit slower, 3.3 seconds, but still very, very quick. You have 10.9 inches for the touchscreen in the interior, and that is totally fine by me. 10.9, 11.9, I don't care. Honestly, I think I actually prefer the smaller version because I think screens are just becoming ridiculous these days. You have, of course, wireless Apple CarPlay and Wi-Fi hotspot in the Porsche. But the thing about the Mercedes here, so have a look at this. Both of these articles, of course, linked down in the description. The AMG GT has undergone a pretty significant weight gain. It weighs more than 4,000 pounds. And comparing that with the Porsche 911 Turbo, for example, which is 708 pounds lighter than the lightest 2024 AMG GT. So it weighs quite a lot, but I also think that maybe suits a Mercedes to have a little bit more weight to it. So honestly, it's all fine for me. Now let's jump into Photoshop and let's talk about what really matters here, and that is these two designs. So we have the Porsche GT3 downstairs, and we have the new Mercedes AMG up top. And look at how beautifully sculpted this is. Inside view, there is a couple of things that are a little different from the previous generation when it comes to the proportions, which I think the old AMG GT just had that special proportion in the side view. Here, they had to fit 4 or 2+2, so you have 2 rear seats here. So it extended the greenhouse a little bit, but the front end looks very nice and beautiful. It doesn't look too aggressive. So that's what I want Mercedes to be. BMW can be all about the angry eyes and the kidney, the grill, the nose in the front end. But Mercedes to me has always been the more elegant design, and I think Mercedes did a great job with this design. You can see just how soft and harmonic this front end is. And then they also extended the grille. So the grille normally would end right here. We can see the outline for basically the old grille, but now it's extended further down. And what I like about this is you can see that the grille has a clear connection to the bodywork, because look at this piece down here, this wing coming up and cutting into the wing. We have a piece inside right here and right here that has a clear connection to the front end bodywork. We also have new daytime run lights with these 3 elliptical LEDs down there, looking pretty cool. And I love this feature on pretty much every performance Mercedes. These 2 small bulges that we have in the hood, introduced in 1997 with the Mercedes SLK, still being in their cars today. Now looking at the Porsche 911 GT3 down here, you can see the differences here in philosophy. It's like a completely different car when it comes to the styling, because this is more of a proper sports car instead of a GT. Even though they have the touring version of the GT3, the exterior styling with all this industrial feel, for example, this scoop here in the hood, or in the trunk in this case, looks very industrial and functional. It's very static looking, and I love that about the GT3 because it brings in this race car feel to this design. I also like this lower intake with this very sharp corner up here. Still has a nice radius to it, which connects to all the other radiuses that we have in the front end. And we also have this piece at the very bottom that you can have in body color if you want to. I would personally keep this piece black like we have in this car, with maybe silver, because silver looks so classic on a Porsche 911 proportions. And of course you do have the classic round headlights, and same thing here. It's not an aggressive design. Have you ever seen an aggressive looking Porsche in production? I haven't, and I think that is a key feature for Porsche, to keep it classy like this, even when you go up to the high trims like the GT3, for example. So looking at the side view here, and here is the big difference when it comes to the Mercedes AMG compared to the old generation of the AMG GT Coupe. The greenhouse, as I said, they needed to stretch the greenhouse here. So we have this beautiful line going across here, adding a little bit of a soft muscle over the rear axle right here. We have a sharp line at the bottom going in to this air outlet, which I do believe is functional. So we have some air funneling out from the wheelhouse and shooting out this way. Beautiful design overall, but the proportions are not the same as we had in the old GT, because the old GT had the A-pillar moved back to almost the mid-section of the car. Now you can see that they moved forward the A-pillar a little bit, making it look a lot more like the Porsche 911. I mean, just look at these two cars. You can see just how similar these are. The biggest difference here are not the proportions anymore. It is the front end. In the Mercedes, it has more of a forward-leaning front face, which is typical Mercedes. Looks great, and again, the roofline going a little bit further forward in this case. But the rear end, the dip here, very, very similar to the same line that we have in the Porsche, and even the rear graphics, how they implemented this, because Porsche 911 taillights have been moved upwards slowly over the decades, and now they essentially sit in the same position like we have in the Mercedes. And as you can see, the Porsche down here, very smooth design. And again, we have this more backward-leaning front face, more of an exotic feel to this design compared to the Mercedes. I love both of these designs, and choosing between one of these is not going to be easy, but I do think I know which one I would take to my drive to meet up with a couple of friends for a coffee through the mountain roads. Look at the greenhouse design here as well. The glass portion, very similar here in both two cars, and it's pretty crazy to think about when you look at it like this, just how similar the new AMG GT actually is to the Porsche 911. However, there is one detail on the 911 that I love more than any other design feature on this car, and that is this beautiful, gorgeous little ducktail in the back end. That just is such a small little detail, completely transforms the Porsche design, because Porsche has a very sloped out roofline going back here, and normally it doesn't come back up at all. But having this little send-off here, it just adds this nice end point to the very end of the car. I also love these LEDs. We're gonna have a look at those in just a minute when we look at the rear view. You can see that the cutout in the bumper for the GT3 is very similar to the cutout that we have in the front end. So it has a connection in the front all the way to the back. And it looks like we do have different proportion wheels here. These might be 21s and these may be 20s. In the Mercedes, I think we have the same setup here with a smaller size in the front end, which seems to be the trend for the past couple of years, maybe 3 years or so. I think BMW was the big brand that started doing this. And I would personally like to have the same wheel size, both front and rear. Now, looking at the rear ends of this, and I think this is probably my favorite views of both of these cars. I think the Mercedes is just an absolutely stunning design because we don't have any sharp lines in the bodywork. The only sharp line is this line at the bottom right here that cuts into this air outlet that we talked about in the side view. But other than that, it's a super smooth design, but it doesn't look bubbly. It still looks planted, this design. And I think that has to do with these taillights as well, just now being a lot more horizontal and kind of stretching out the rear end in both directions to drag out the design. And of course you have this muscle on top of the rear axle as well. In this case we do have a spoiler in the back, this being the 63 I do believe, and we also have a very organic lower section with this integration of the diffuser. You can see all the curvatures here, but I like it because I think these organic curvatures, they suit the overall vibe that we have in the rest of the body of the Mercedes. So it comes back nicely in the rear end. And of course you need to have the quad tailpipes down here in typical AMG style, blacked out, sitting in the black diffuser. But have a look at the Porsche GT3 here. It just looks so good. It's so classic, this design, and specifically when you add this gorgeous little ducktail here in addition to the big inverted GT3 wing that hangs up top. It's just such a beast of a rear end of the Porsche 911. And you have this cutout again, cutting into the body, removing some of this mass and making it look very, very nimble, this design. Another detail that I love that we talked about in the side view are the taillights, because this is just one single strip of LED. Doesn't need to be anything more than that. And I think it suits Porsche to have this design of the taillights because it's a simplified design of a tradition that Porsche has had for a long time, specifically in their 4S model, to have a connection between the right side and the left side by having a connection with the LED in the middle. The only thing I would like to change here, maybe, I'm not sure, it's a pretty cool integration of the exhaust pipes to have them centered like that, but I would probably want to have them sit further out. It's just my personal preference, but it doesn't really bother me that much. We still have the typical Porsche shape here, and as you can see, in silver it just looks so classy and so good, and in addition to the decal that we have down here. But same thing here as in the Mercedes, not a single sharp line in this design. It just looks great, and traditional Porsche being the #1 brand when it comes to refining their identity and not having a big revolution and just trying something completely new. And I think that has definitely helped the Porsche brand over time. Now, last but not least, definitely not least, we need to have a look at both of these interiors. And you can see the Mercedes interior, it does look good. I do think the Mercedes interior look more modern, but modern to me these days is not always a good thing. In most cases, modern interiors are not a good thing over classic laid out interiors like we have in the GT3 down here. We have a big 11.9-inch infotainment screen, which I do believe in this case is also, maybe it is centered, but in the GLC, I just reviewed it. I drove it around for a week and I thought I was gonna go nuts because the center screen is tilted by 6 degrees. Makes me crazy because I just want to take it and make it centered. I'm not sure from this angle if this is actually centered with the rest of the interior or if this also has the same 6-degree angle on it, but it didn't bother me as much as I thought. However, we still have a gauge cluster here, but the thing about this compared to less or cheaper Mercedes models is that we do have a bit of a housing for this infotainment screen, and I actually think it looks really good. And then we have the Mercedes steering wheel with the drive mode selector down here, exhaust button down here, and this is just a gorgeous steering wheel. I've said this before, that Mercedes does some of the best looking wheel designs, both when it comes to steering wheel and also the exterior wheel designs. Overall, it's a good looking modern interior, this, but I just think this screen, 11.9, like sitting like this, it just feels very strangely integrated, like it just comes up out of nowhere and doesn't have a connection to the rest of the interior. Now looking at the Porsche, very, very classic, traditional integration of everything here. We have a clean, classic, you can see housing right here for the gauge cluster, and look at this, even the tachometer in the middle is analog, which is a huge deal today because this is a $200,000 car and you still have an analog tachometer, which I think is absolutely fantastic because that is the single piece of instrument in a GT3 that you always want to keep your eyes on and be quick to see what's going on. And thankfully that is front and center and all analog. On the sides here, as you can see, everything else though is completely digital, so it shows you where the priorities are when it comes to instrumentation for Porsche 911s. I love that they did that. Then you have the smaller screen here, 10.9 inches, 1 inch smaller than the Mercedes. I think this, again, like this just looks better. It just feels better. We don't need this big screen in the small TV in the middle. This is totally fine because you're not getting into a car to fiddle around with the software. At least that's not what I want to do when I get into a car. I get into a car to appreciate the build quality, the materials, and how everything is integrated, the line flow, and that is what I think Porsche is doing very, very well here. We even have some physical buttons down here that we don't have in the Mercedes, and of course we do have a manual transmission for the GT3. I do like this steering wheel as well. Very simplistic design, 3-spoke steering wheel with the Alcantara around it. It just looks fantastic. So if I woke up on a Sunday morning and I had the choice between the Mercedes AMG GT Coupe, the Porsche 911 GT3. If I think about it like this, if I had them both in front of me, which one could I not just drive away from? And that car is going to be the Porsche 911 GT3 because it's just such a beautiful car, and I love the design that they put into it, that they combined this racing-inspired exterior design with some daily driver characteristics in this design. It's just a complete package to me. So for me, if I were to take one of these, it's going to be the Porsche 911 GT3.